Imagine an entire town, filled with men, women, and children, vanishing into thin air overnight. They left no bodies, no signs of a struggle, and no tracks in the dirt. The only clue they left behind was a single, cryptic word, carved into a wooden post: Croatoan. In 1590, 115 settlers disappeared from Roanoke Island, leaving behind a silence that has haunted historians for over 4 centuries. Were they massacred? Did they starve? Or did they step into a world we aren't meant to understand? Today, we are peeling back the layers of America's oldest cold case. Stay with me until the very end, because the latest archaeological evidence might have finally solved the mystery that was never meant to be unraveled. Before we dive into the dark woods of Roanoke and uncover the secrets hidden beneath the soil, I want to invite you to join our journey through time. If you crave stories that challenge what you know about history, hit that subscribe button right now and turn on notifications for echoes of the past. Your support helps us keep these forgotten voices alive, and we're just getting started on a journey you want to meet. Storytelling body, the story of the lost colony begins, not with a mystery, but with an ambitious dream. It was the late 16th century, an era of exploration and high-stakes colonial expansion. Queen Elizabeth I of England wanted to establish a permanent presence in the New World to challenge the growing power of the Spanish Empire. The task was handed to Sir Walter Raleigh, a man of vision and immense ego. His first attempt in 1585 had failed miserably due to food shortages and hostile relations with the local tribes, but Raleigh wasn't a man to give up easily. In 1587, he gathered a new group of 115 settlers. Unlike the first expedition, which was mostly soldiers, this group included familiesmen, women, and children. They weren't just looking for gold. They were looking for a home. Among them was John White, an artist and a friend of Raleigh, who was appointed as the governor of the new colony. White brought with him his pregnant daughter, Eleanor Dare. This was meant to be a fresh start, a beacon of English civilization in the vast, untamed wilderness of North America. The voyage across the Atlantic was brutal. 4 weeks, the settlers were packed into cramped, creaking wooden ships, tossed by massive waves and plagued by sickness. When they finally sighted land, the relief was short-lived. They had originally planned to settle in the Chesapeake Bay area, which had better harbors and soil. However, the ship's pilot, a man named Simon Fernandez, grew impatient. He refused to take them any further and forced the settlers to disembark at Roanoke Island, the very site of the failed previous colony. This was the first omen of the disaster to come. Roanoke was already a place of tension. The previous English soldiers had left a legacy of violence with the local Croatoan tribe. Upon arrival, the 1587 settlers found the remains of the old fort destroyed and the bones of one of the soldiers left behind. Despite the grim welcome, they had no choice. They began rebuilding the houses, planting crops, and trying to forge a life. On August 18, 1587, Eleanor Dare gave birth to a daughter, Virginia Dare. She was the first English child born in the Americas, a symbol of hope for the entire colony. But hope doesn't fill empty stomachs. By the end of the first month, the settlers realized they were in trouble. Their supplies were dwindling, and the local tribes were rightfully suspicious and increasingly hostile. The colony was on the brink of starvation before it had even begun. The settlers pleaded with John White to return to England and bring back desperate reinforcements and food. White was torn. He didn't want to leave his daughter and newborn granddaughter in such a dangerous place. But he knew that if he stayed, they would all surely die. Reluctantly, in late August 1587, White boarded a ship back to England. He promised his people he would be back within 6 to 9 months. As the sails of his ship disappeared over the horizon, the 115 settlers stood on the shore of Roanoke, surrounded by a dark, whispering forest and an ocean that now felt like a prison. They were alone. John White didn't know that it would be 3 years before he saw that shore again, and by then, the people he loved would be nothing but echoes in the wind. Why did John White take 3 years to return? And what happened to the settlers during those 1,000 days of silence? The answers lie in a web of war, pirates, and a mystery that only gets darker from here. Part 2 is coming up next, where we explored the frantic search and the first terrifying clues found at the abandoned fort. What do you think the settlers did the moment White's ship disappeared? Let me know in the comments. Don't forget to share this video, and I'll see you in the next chapter of this haunting mystery. John White had left Roanoke with a heavy heart promising to return before the winter winds of 1587 began to roll. But as his ship cut through the gray waters of the Atlantic, he had no idea that a global storm was brewing, one that would trap him thousands of miles away from his family for 3 agonizing years. When he arrived in England, he found a country on the brink of war. The Spanish Armada, the greatest naval force of the time, was preparing to invade England. Queen Elizabeth I issued a desperate order. Every single English ship was needed for the defense of the kingdom. No ship was allowed to leave for the New World. White was trapped. He spent his days in London, begging the Queen's advisors and Sir Walter Raleigh for a small vessel, but his pleas fell on deaf ears. For him, the war wasn't about empires. It was about his daughter Eleanor and his granddaughter Virginia. Were they starving? Were they safe? Every night he spent in the comfort of an English bed. He imagined them huddled in a cold, wooden fort, watching the dark tree line of Roanoke for a sail that never appeared. It wasn't until 1590, 3 years after he had left, that White finally secured passage on a privateering ship. The journey back was a nightmare of storms and pirate encounters, but White's eyes were fixed only on the horizon. On August 10th, 1590, his granddaughter's 3rd birthday, he finally saw the smoke rising from Roanoke Island. His heart leaped. Smoke meant fire, and fire meant life. He ordered the men to row the boats toward the shore, even as the sun began to set and a thick, ghostly fog rolled in from the sea. As they neared the shore, White saw something that chilled him to the bone. Together, he and his men began to sing English folk songs across the water, hoping for a familiar voice to call back. But there was no reply, only the sound of the waves crashing against the sand. When they finally stepped onto the beach, the smoke they had seen turned out to be a forest fire, and not a hearth fire. The island was silent. They marched toward the settlement, their torches flickering in the damp air. What they found was not a massacre, but a ghost. The heavy wooden palisade that had protected the colony was still standing, but the houses inside had been completely dismantled. Not burned, not torn down in anger, but carefully taken apart, as if the settlers had moved their belongings with purpose. There were no graves, no bodies, and no signs of a struggle. It was as if 115 people had simply walked into the woods and vanished. Then, White's torch caught something on one of the main posts of the fort. Carved in bold capital letters was the word Croatoan. On another tree nearby, the letters Crow were etched into the bark. There was no cross, the secret signal White had told the settlers to leave if they were in danger. This meant they had left willingly. But why? And why had they left so much behind? Chests of books, maps, and drawings. White's own belongings were found scattered and ruined by the rain, buried in the dirt. White wanted to sail to Croatoan Island immediately, convinced his family was there, living with a friendly tribe of Manteo. But fate had one last cruel twist. A massive storm began to brew, threatening to smash their ships against the reefs. The sailors, tired and afraid, refused to go any further. They forced White to turn back toward the Caribbean, promising to return in the spring. But that return never happened. White died in England years later, his heart broken, never knowing if his granddaughter was a queen among the natives or a ghost in the trees. The carving of Croatoan is the most famous clue in American history. But what if it was a lie? What if it was a message intended to lead rescuers away from the real truth? In part 3, we're going to look at the terrifying theories of what happened during those 3 years, from the dare stones to the darker possibility of a secret Spanish massacre. If you've stayed with me this long, you're part of a small group that truly wants to know the truth. Tell me in the comments, do you think the letters Crow were a half-finished warning or a sign of hope? Share this video and get ready, because part 3 is where the mystery turns into a nightmare. The silence of Roanoke Island didn't just leave a hole in history. It created a vacuum that has been filled by some of the most unsettling theories imaginable. For centuries, people have asked, how do 115 people, infants, and the elderlies, simply vanish, without leaving a single drop of blood or a broken bone? If they weren't killed by the local tribes, then what force on earth could make an entire colony abandon their homes and march into the unknown? To find the answer, we have to look past the Croatoan carving into the darker corners of the 16th century wilderness. The first and most enduring theory is one of assimilation. This is the hopeful version of the story. It suggests that the settlers, starving and desperate after 3 years of waiting for John White, decided to move to Croatoan Island, now known as Hatteras Island, to live with the friendly Croatoan tribe. They were led by Monteo, a native who had traveled to England and was a firm ally of the settlers. Proponents of this theory point to the fact that later explorers in the 17th century reported seeing gray-eyed Indians and natives who could speak English. If TC's true, the lost colony wasn't lost at all. They simply became part of the very land they tried to conquer. But not everyone believes in such a peaceful ending. A much darker theory suggests a massacre not by the natives, but by the hands of the jealous Spanish Empire. At the time, Spain claimed all of North America and viewed the English colony as a threat to their dominance. We know from historical records that the Spanish were actively searching for Roanoke to destroy it. Could a Spanish fleet have slipped into the bay, slaughtered the settlers, and cleaned up the evidence to avoid an all-out war with England? It would explain why the houses were gone, but it doesn't explain the lack of bodies or the carving on the tree. Then, there are the Dare stones. In 1937, a tourist found a 21-pound stone in a swamp, covered in strange carvings. When translated, it appeared to be a message from Eleanor Dare to her father, John White. It told a harrowing story of the settlers fleeing inland to escape hostile tribes, only to be hunted down one by one. The stone claimed that Eleanor's husband and daughter, Virginia Dare, had been killed, and that she was the only one left. Over the next few years, 40 more stones appeared, telling a tragic tale of the colony's journey through the Carolinas. While many experts believe these stones were a sophisticated hoax designed to make money during the Great Depression, some geologists have recently argued that the first stone, at least, could be authentic. And then, there are the theories that border on the supernatural. Some local legends speak of a devil-esque hoofprint on the island and a mysterious spirit that guards the woods. While science dismisses these, the sheer eeriness of 115 people vanishing without a trace often leads the mind to places logic cannot follow. Was there a plague? Did they turn on each other in a fit of cannibalistic hunger, much like the later Donner Party? Or did they attempt to build a boat and sail back to England, only to be swallowed by the graveyard of the Atlantic? The truth is, for over 400 years, Roanoke has remained a puzzle with half its pieces missing. But just when we thought we had reached a dead end, modern science stepped in. In the next and final part of this series, we are going to explore the groundbreaking DNA evidence and the hidden markings on John White's maps that might finally put the ghosts of Roanoke to rest. The mystery is about to reach its climax, and the conclusion is something no one saw coming. Of all the theories we've discussed, assimilation, massacre, or the tragic journey of the Dare stones, which one feels the most real to you? Could a mother's message on a rock be the key to it all? Tell me what you think in the comments below. Your theories are what keep the spirit of echoes of the past alive. If you found these theories as gripping as I did, share this video with a friend who loves a good unsolved mystery. Stay tuned for the final chapter, where we reveal the secret of Site X and the fate of the first English child born in America. For over 4 centuries, the lost colony of Roanoke was treated as a ghost story, a chilling mystery without a satisfying ending. It became a part of American folklore, a tale whispered in the dark about people who simply ceased to exist. But as we step into the modern era, the shadows of the 16th century are finally being illuminated by the cold, analytical light of 21st century science. While old legends spoke of spirits, demons, and sudden massacres, a new generation of archaeologists, historians, and geneticists has been quietly digging into the dirt and the DNA of the Carolinas. What they have uncovered is changing everything we thought we knew about the fate of those 115 souls. The first major breakthrough in this cold case didn't come from a shovel or a brush, but from a discovery hidden in plain sight for hundreds of years. In 2012, researchers at the British Museum decided to re-examine John White's 1585 map of the Roanoke region, a document known as La Virginia Apars. For centuries, people had looked at this map, but no one had noticed the 2 small patches where the paper had been layered and repaired. Using modern X-ray spectroscopy and advanced multispectral imaging, scientists looked underneath those patches. What they found sent shockwaves through the historical community and turned the mystery on its head. Hidden beneath the surface of the map was a tiny, red and blue 4-pointed star symbol used by 16th century explorers to mark the location of a secret fort. Most importantly, this symbol wasn't located on the coast of Roanoke. It was marked 50 miles inland, at the head of the Albarel Sound. This location, which archaeologists now call Site X, was a strategically perfect hiding spot. It was far enough inland to be invisible to passing Spanish warships, yet close enough to the water to allow for transport. This discovery provided the first real map to where the settlers might have gone. Archaeologists immediately rushed to Site X and began an intensive excavation. The earth began to speak. They unearthed fragments of English borderware of the exact type used by the Roanoke settlers in the 1580s. They found pieces of flintlock guns, lead shot, and metal tools that predated any other known English settlement in that area by nearly 100 years. This was the smoking gun. It proved that the colony didn't just vanish into thin air. They followed a prearranged plan. When resources grew thin and the threat of attack became too great, they didn't just run. They moved to their secondary safe house, deep in the American wilderness. But the physical evidence is only one side of the coin. The most human and emotional part of this revelation lies in the blood of the people who live in North Carolina today. For generations, families in the region, particularly members of the Lumbee and other local tribes, have maintained a persistent oral tradition. They have always claimed that they are the descendants of the lost colony. For a long time, historians dismissed these stories as myths. However, recent DNA projects have begun to back these claims with undeniable data. Geneticists have identified European DNA markers in the local Native American populations that trace back to the late 1500s. Long before the next wave of English settlers arrived in Jamestown or Plymouth, imagine the life of Virginia Dare, the first English child born in the Americas. In the dark versions of the story, she is a ghost or a victim of a brutal end, but the reality is far more incredible. She likely grew up, not within the cramped wooden walls of a fort, but in the wide open spaces of a Native American village. She would have learned their language and adopted their customs and eventually married into their families. Her descendants are not ghosts. They are likely walking the streets of America today, perhaps unaware that they carry the blood of the most famous lost girl in history. The lost colony wasn't lost because they died. They were lost because they chose to survive by letting go of their English identity and becoming part of the land itself. As we look back at the echoes of Roanoke, we realize that the mystery was kept alive for 400 years, partly because of our own fascination with tragedy. We wanted a sensational ending, a massive battle or a supernatural event. But the real story is a testament to human resilience and the power of adaptation. It's a story of 115 people who, when abandoned by their country and faced with certain death, chose to build a bridge instead of a wall. They looked at the people they were told to fear and saw instead a way to survive. The word Croatoan wasn't a desperate cry for help. It was a direction toward a new life. The woods of Roanoke Island are still quiet today, and the wind still rustles through the trees where John White once stood in despair. But the silence no longer feels like a secret. We now know that the settlers didn't step into the shadows. They stepped into the light of a new culture. Their journey reminds us that history is not just a collection of dates and names. It is a living, breathing thing that flows through our veins. The echoes of the past are all around us, in the soil we walk on and the people we meet. You just have to know how to listen. Now that the mystery of Roanoke has finally been brought into the light, how does it change the way you look at history? Does the truth of their survival feel more powerful than the legend of their disappearance? I want to hear your thoughts. In the comments, your perspective is what makes this community so special. If you've followed us through all 4 parts of this journey, thank you for your incredible support. Make sure to share this final chapter with anyone who loves a mystery solved. I'm already working on our next deep dive into a forgotten corner of the past, so stay tuned. The echoes are calling until next time. Keep searching for the truth.